Hurricane Imelda had all of us here in the US on the edges of our seats. It teased us with a potential landfall, but Humberto came in and saved the day and is sweeping Imelda out to sea. Unfortunately, this means impacts for Bermuda, and those are slated to begin in just a few hours as of recording time. Hey there, my name is Eric. I'm an aspiring meteorologist working my way towards my atmospheric science degree. The date is October 1st, 2025. We're officially in my favorite month of the year. I'm actually really excited for that. Hopefully there's some cooler weather that we can look forward to here soon. This video is going to be quicker than most that I've made. We're going to do a quick analysis of Imelda and what's left of Humberto, as well as the tropics and what to expect next now that the US has been cleared of direct impacts from Imelda. So essentially you can say that the East Coast was saved by a hurricane. It's not often that you can say that a hurricane saved the day. We're not going to go too much into the nitty-gritty of all the science and the different factors and layers of the atmosphere today, but we're just going to kind of talk about some expectations and some signs that the models are giving us for a future term. And I kind of thought, since I cover tropical Atlantic weather, I would talk about the impacts to Bermuda, even though I don't live in Bermuda, and even though I'm sure everyone there has their resources needed to prepare for the storm, beyond just some random content creator on YouTube. I want to do this for documentation and also just to spread the awareness of the impacts in Bermuda, just in case if that helps some. Diving right in, we're going to take a look at Imelda and Humberto from yesterday, and you can see, just as we expected, both of them were essentially shearing each other in this sort of dramatic dynamic that they have going on. Humberto prior was a frankly beautiful and really well put together storm, but once it got close to Imelda, which is here, it started suffering the impacts of counter shear. This really is kind of a novel case for meteorology, and especially here in the Atlantic Basin, because you don't often get storms that get this close to each other. I think I actually learned earlier that this is now the second closest approach that two hurricanes have made to each other in the Atlantic Basin. The closest since an approach back in the 1800s. That record was 426 miles. This one, I believe, is somewhere around 460, these two between each other. And that specifically is the distance between the center of both of them. And with that, you have a Fujiwara effect occurring, which is always really interesting to see because we just really don't see it often. So this really is actually stunning. You can see when they engage in this dance, if you want to call it, because of the way they interact. For one, upper atmosphere shear, which I'm kind of illustrating here, that is required to help the storms breathe, both counteract each other, and they flow in these different directions. Both these storms need this clockwise diffluence upper atmosphere rotation in order to breathe, and if one of them is canceling out some of the other's recycled air, then that will prevent them from being an efficient and vertically stacked storm. So that's kind of why you see these are fairly formidable hurricanes, but they don't look very iconic and characteristic of one. They kind of look more like tropical storms, really. So this is all really interesting, and it's cool that I got to witness this and that record being broken. Jumping ahead another day, this is where we are now. This is Imelda, and this is what is left of Humberto. You can see Humberto does not really look very healthy there. It is now post-tropical. And it's interesting, earlier forecasts were suggesting that Humberto would be the demise of Imelda, but Imelda has won this overall battle and this elegant dance, if you want to call it, and it is the last to remain, and it is currently beginning to absorb what's left of Humberto into its core. This is all happening as Imelda is now making its approach to Bermuda, and right about now, residents there are probably beginning to experience some of the tropical storm impacts from the storm as the outer bands begin to reach the island. The storm is actually moving relatively fast, and it has a pretty low pressure. It is expected to strengthen slightly before it makes its closest approach to Bermuda. Of course, Bermuda is entirely under a hurricane warning, as that hurricane core will pass directly over the island. And just looking at wind speed probabilities, that pretty much solidifies the likelihood of dealing with a pretty dangerous situation here. It's kind of interesting to see Humberto's and Imelda's fields cross like that. This is what's actually pretty concerning. As we get later into the day, the likelihood of hurricane force winds increases. Bermuda is in that 70 to 80% likelihood area. I think it's pretty safe to say that Bermuda is going to experience hurricane force winds. It's not often that Bermuda gets hit by these storms directly because of how small it is and how big the Atlantic generally is. But this is just kind of one of those unlucky cases where Imelda just ended up right in vicinity. It's not going to make a direct landfall, at least that's not expected, but it is going to be really close to shore. I mean, the center will go just south of it, just a few miles off the coast. As the storm comes through, you're going to have the right front quadrant, which is the most powerful of the storm, bring water up to the island this way. And you're going to have northerly wind coming in this way that's going to push water on the northern end of the island. I haven't really studied Bermuda and Bermuda hurricanes very much, but I know that this just gandering quickly, this is kind of what looks like a worst case scenario, because pretty much storm surge will impact both sides of the island in a way that's not ideal, obviously. Now, historically, Bermuda has a pretty good resistance to hurricanes. There's building standards, and people are pretty... Historically, Bermuda has a pretty... Okay, let's start a new clip. Now, historically, Bermuda has a pretty good track record against hurricanes. Fatalities there are seemingly rare, just based upon quick research that I did. I think the last time that we saw a fatality from hurricanes was from Fabian in 2003, and that was when people were driving over the causeway when storm surge was coming in, and that was a Cat 4 hurricane, which is obviously much worse than a Cat 2. Most residential areas in Bermuda sit decent bit above sea level. The island is pretty hilly, but there are low-lying areas along some of the roads, and little inlet channels and probably harbors and things like that, as well as some downtown areas that probably lie lower that need to be a bit more concerned. These areas in the lighter blue are where you're most likely, really where you're going to see any storm surge at all. With Fabian back in 2003, it was 11 feet of storm surge, I believe. I don't have sources for what storm surge is going to be like from Imelda here, but most Cat 2 storms like this produce around anywhere from 1 to 10 feet of storm surge, depending on coastal shape as well as bathymetry. With Bermuda's topography, it seems evident that major storm surge is not really much of a great concern, and the biggest threat really is flooding, rain, and debris from high wind. So people up on the higher elevations in these residential areas will definitely want to prepare their houses for flying debris. They will probably want to, I'd imagine, have already boarded up their windows and stuff like that if they do that. But again, places in Bermuda are pretty, they have standards for this kind of stuff because it's an island out in the middle of the sea. They're bound to get hurricanes. Low-lying areas like these harbors and some parts of Hamilton near downtown and other streets and roads that pass along these lower-lying areas will probably see some inundation. Generally want to avoid those areas as the storm's passing through. You definitely don't want to be outside while this is happening because think about what happened during Fabian. People were on the road when the storm came in and the storm surge swept them, killed 4 people. But the storm surge with that was higher than what will be with this because it was a Cat 4, but still not worth playing that game, really. Looking at most likely arrival time of winds, you can see now with Bermuda, they are probably seeing the first bit of tropical storm force winds, although these National Weather Service forecasts tend to be a bit They tend to be a bit early, probably for precautionary reasons. At least that's what I've observed while storm chasing. So most likely arrival time, majority of the island will be experiencing tropical storm force winds after 8 hours from now, and then going into night is where things will go downhill. I don't know the odds of someone living in Bermuda watching this, but if you are, just hunker down, stay safe. It's not worth messing with. This is a considerable storm, so do what you normally have to do there to prepare, because impacts are beginning now, and by the time I upload this video, you'll probably already be in. It'll already be looking a fair bit worse. So what does this mean for the rest of the tropics? Do we have any other concerns other than Imelda? And the answer to that is no. Currently, we do not have any designated areas to watch, but I will review forecast models with you just to give you an idea of potential. And since we are still in hurricane season, no longer in the peak of hurricane season, as it is October 1st, we still need to keep an eye out, because hurricanes can and have and normally do form, even still going into October. And this is when the Gulf and Caribbean get more active as the main development region over here begins to simmer down. So that is kind of what we're going to be looking at. So we're just going to look at the GFS model real quick, like just completely long term. We're going to look at everything that it currently has expected, and it is in the less reliable hours really far down the line, showing a hurricane forming in the Caribbean, moving over the Bahamas and then Florida and the Florida Keys and into the Gulf, and that's a almost intense hurricane right there. This is the forecast for October 17th, so don't panic over this because it's likely not going to happen. It can happen, but that's kind of what I wanted to show you this, just to kind of discern the difference between what's likely and what's not, and kind of the nuance behind it. If we look at the latest run, it keeps it more south, and then it takes it going southwest into the Gulf towards Mexico. Looking at the Euro's run, it is not reciprocating this storm, so that is good news. At least it is not reciprocating the initial formation of it. The GFS thinks that something is going to form here in the Caribbean around October 12th. Observing further with the ensemble, you can see some of what it is spitting out there. There are some systems that it expects to go up further out to sea, and then it has a couple maybe going here through the Caribbean, and then it even has one forming here near Central America and going up into the Gulf. Now the Euro also has a few things popping up, especially here heading towards the Caribbean from the main development region, and then it does have something coming up here from near the Florida Keys, it looks like. I think given that the Euro expects a low pressure system, while not as initially developed as the GFS is showing it to be in the Caribbean when it makes its approach to the islands there, like the Dominican Republic and Haiti, this is still probably a trend worth watching, but it is just so far down the line that it's not a reason to panic. It's not a reason to get antsy. National Weather Service doesn't have anything designated, and it's usually not until models show a storm forming within more reliable hours of the models, as well as conducive environmental conditions for a storm to form. Right now, there is a lot of dry air over the main development region and even in parts of the Gulf. So that's why any of these tropical waves that we currently have probably aren't going to turn into anything besides ahead of time. You see with the GFS there. Wind shear is pretty light in the main development region, but in the Caribbean it is heavier. So temperatures in the Atlantic are generally still warm, and most of it warm enough to produce tropical cyclones, especially in the Caribbean and the Gulf. And as I said, even going into October, it's still a good idea to keep an eye on things because hurricanes still do form this time of the year. And hurricane season runs all the way through November 30th. It's not often you see a lot of hurricanes in November, but it can happen. So that is everything that I have to talk about today. I'm not going to do a local weather analysis today just because of the time crunch of this video. I'm already going to be getting it uploaded late just for the purpose that it's mainly serving, which is Bermuda. Probably tomorrow or the day after that, I will upload an outlook for the US. So you can keep an eye out for that. Hope you found this video helpful. Remember to take care, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. And you are the storm.